I really believe that there are windows of opportunity in which it's the easiest to help our kids. And the earlier we start, the better. The more that they get more independent and they're away from you at school, the more difficult it is to monitor their diet and to make sure that they're getting the foods that are working best for their bodies. And before puberty is, I think, a really important window where we can have a dramatic transformation in their health and behavior and really change the trajectory of their entire life for the better.
Yeah.
And we want to make sure that they at a certain point begin to understand that they're maybe not like the other kids and maybe begin to feel bad about themselves. Like, I'm just a bad kid. Or they might start to develop opinions about themselves that really, like we've talked about, that's not who they are. It's the manifestation of what they've been exposed to. And so the earlier we can address it, it's going to help with their self-confidence, their self-esteem, and how they view themselves now and in the future.
Welcome to the Soaring Child podcast, where parents of children with ADHD learn tips and tricks to help their child soar at home, at school, and in life. We feature interviews with experts, medical professionals, and parents just like you who are learning how to reduce ADHD symptoms using food and other natural strategies. Because children with ADHD deserve to soar just like every other child. I'm Dana Kay, your host. Now it is time to welcome Robin Green to the Soaring Child. Hi, Robin. Thank you so much for joining us.
Hi, Dan. Thank you so much for having me.
You are welcome. You're welcome. I was actually really looking forward to you coming onto the podcast to sort of talk more about acupuncture and acupressure and how it can really be beneficial for mental health, because I have had my own experience with acupuncture. And so, really wanted to dive in and see how it can be beneficial for our kiddos. So can't wait to chat with you. And I get to see you next week in person, which is really exciting.
Absolutely. This is one of course, my favorite topics because there's so many tools that parents can use at home that can help their child and so many resources for them. So I really love chatting about this with you today.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, before we sort of dive into the ins and outs or the depths of acupuncture, working with many children as you have in your practice, why do you think children are so sick today?
That is such a great question. And I've been working with kids for over 18 years.
Wow.
And when I first started out, I was so optimistic that we were going to really turn the trends around and we were going to help these kids. And, in my practice, I've certainly helped a lot of children, but the trends have not been getting better. In fact, they're getting worse. And I think we've seen in the last 20 years some real changes to our environment that are gravely impacting our children. So we're seeing like unprecedented levels of toxic exposure. We're seeing unprecedented levels of, EMF exposure, which are radio frequencies that can, in even tiny amounts, affect the developing brain and affect our children's ability to get a good, deep, restful sleep. And we're also experiencing dramatic changes in the quality of our food and the food that's supposed to be nourishing our bodies, even when we're eating organic, that we're just not getting the nutrients we were even 20, 30 years ago.
Yes, definitely. I was just talking about that with someone else on a separate episode about just even the soil. The soil is lacking all of those nutrients and goodness to feed the food compared to 20 years ago. So, the toxin exposure, the EMFs, I think EMFs probably have to get you back for another episode on that one, because
Yes.
a lot of parents out there, don't know much about it. And I think that that's a big one that we can dive into. And so how do you think this is affecting, our kids? Why do you think so many are really struggling with ADHD and neurological issues today?
That is it's such a good question. And I like to bring it back to the concepts of Chinese medicine about health. And when things are flowing, when our energy is flowing, our circulation is flowing, our nervous impulses are flowing, we are in a state of health. And when there's some kind of interference, it creates a stagnation in the flow. And that is what causes different health problems. So when we were just talking about what the causes are, the toxin exposure, EMFs, the quality of our food,
Mm.
not just, even if we're eating organic, if we're getting little micro amounts of glyphosate in our foods, all of those things are creating interference in the body. And then the body can't do what it's designed to do, which is to heal itself.
Mm-hmm.
And so then it just creates, when that happens over and over again, those exposures are happening on a daily basis. They add up. And now not only are we not healing ourselves as efficiently, we are now seeing symptoms and symptomology and patterns of symptoms that really we've never seen before, that are really recent in the history of man, right? These issues with hyperactivity, aggression,
Mm-hmm.
defiance, tantrums, emotional dysregulation. These are not who our children are, but the manifestation of the toxic exposures that they have, that are then, they're expressing in this way behaviorally or emotionally. And when we remove those interferences, the body is amazing. It is brilliant and it can heal itself. And a lot of that stuff just falls away.
Yeah, no, it definitely is. I sort of say quite a lot that your child's not having a tantrum. It's their body's way of telling you that something else is wrong. That emotional dysregulation, that anger, that's, whether it's toxic overload in the body, whether it's coming from food, whether it's coming from, pesticides, whether it's coming. And so that is the body that's saying there's too much going on in here and it needs to get out. So definitely totally agree with you there. Now, I want to really sort of dive into what you specialize in, being that acupuncture, that acupressure, but also, it sounds like you've done a bit of training in Chinese or medicine. Am I right?
Yes, yes. So I have a master's in traditional Chinese medicine,
Mm,
and I've spent the better part of a decade studying pediatrics and learning how to apply these principles to children. And really, the brilliance is in uh, helping the nervous system come back into balance,
mm.
and getting these kids out of that state of, like, sympathetic overdrive, or when the fight,
Fight or
flight, or
flight.
freeze
Yeah.
part of the nervous system just gets overactivated. It, as well as like under activation of the parasympathetic nervous system. So our rest, digest, relax part of our nervous system sometimes isn't activated enough to counteract the sympathetic. So it's really this beautiful balancing act, and using acupuncture, acupressure, stimulation is a very gentle, easy way that children can accept, that will be very balancing to their nervous system.
Fantastic. And so, can you share with the listeners? I know, probably a number of listeners out there are new to acupuncture or acupressure. Can you just share the basics of how and why it works?
Sure. So in Chinese medicine, we believe that you have an additional system in your body, your energetic system, and the energy runs in specific pathways called meridians. And when there's a blockage in the flow of that energy, that's when we have, whether emotional, behavioral, or physical symptoms or pain that result. And what acupressure and acupuncture do is we can identify where those blockages are, and then use pressure or gentle needles or light or lasers to
Mm,
stimulate those points. And then it helps to move the energy. And also, in looking at it from a Western perspective, what that's doing, like I said, is balancing the nervous system. It's improving the blood flow to the areas. It's reducing inflammation,
mm.
and can help regulate digestion, and also it's very balancing emotionally too. So I have so many children that I've treated where it's like, as soon as I say put the ear seeds on their ear, like within 5 to 10 minutes, that relaxation response is kicking in, and I can just see them calm down right
Mm.
there.
Must be beautiful to watch.
Oh,
Uh,
it is. And they're
what?
so aware of it.
Oh, yeah, yeah. What are ear seeds?
So ear seeds are, so the ear is what we call a hormunculus, which is like the entire body is reflected on the ear. Most people are familiar with like foot reflexology where you push a certain, point on your foot and it'll say affect your back. Well, the ear has that same type of system. And so what we do are put these small little beads on a very tiny piece of adhesive tape, and then you apply it to specific points on the ear, and it will stimulate the nervous system and can relieve a headache, help a child focus, calm the nervous system, help them sleep, so many different conditions. And kids love them because they love having it looks like jewelry. It looks like this little silver or gold bead. And then they have fancy ones where you can get like crystals or little baseballs or, whatever the kids are into. And so not only is it helping the child regulate their nervous system and address specific conditions, but it's also really fun. And they like wearing them, and you set it and forget it, which is really my favorite part, because for busy moms who have a lot going on, a lot of us don't have time to do acupressure 3 or 5 times a day.
Agreed.
Right. I don't have time to do that. I love it, but I don't do that myself. So ear seeds are a perfect way to stimulate the points, balance the nervous system, address conditions, and a set it and forget it. And a lot of kids will wear them for 3 to 5 days, no problem. So you don't
And do
even
they
have to do it
press
every
it
day.
themselves, or does it just do it itself while it's on the ear?
Great question. So what they do is, even if they don't press it, that they're going to get mild continuous acupressure on the point. But if they need additional support, they can press it a few times a day just for 10 seconds. So, and I found that kids loved it because they were so empowered, because they could
Yes.
do something themselves. Like, I felt really upset at school, so I pressed my ear seed and it made me feel better. So it gives them something they can do immediately in a situation if they're at the point where they can begin to understand that, they need to self-regulate, and they have a tool now that can help them with that.
Well, that sounds wonderful. We'll definitely have to share some of those ones that you recommend
Yes.
to listeners out there. And so, what are some sort of basic points? And I know it might be hard for the listeners rather than the viewers. Can you share any sort of basic points where parents, might be able to start to do some of that at home themselves?
Yes. And I'll try and do my best to describe what I'm doing for those listeners out there. But I think the easiest one is called yin tong, and that is in between the eyebrows. So people refer to it as the third
Third
eye.
eye, yes.
And when you're doing acupressure, you do not need to press super duper hard. So it can be as simple as tapping that point. You can just tap it, and there's a whole system of tapping that
Yes.
uses the acupuncture meridians that can be really helpful. Some kids just like that pressure that's very gentle, and I let children decide on what they like, because some kids really like a lot of hard, firm pressure that's very soothing to them, while other kids, hard pressure would hurt. And some kids, a little soft pressure would be ticklish. So you just have to do, the amount of pressure that's going to work best for each child. And then the older they are, the longer you hold it. So if it's a baby, 15, 20 seconds, about 1 to 2 years old, about 30 to 45 seconds. And then once they get about age 5, you want to try and hold the spot for about 1 to 2 minutes, depending on what they'll allow you to do. And this, again, is a great thing to teach your child to do, because then they're empowered. If they're feeling upset, they can just press on their own yin tong for a minute, and it gives them an action that they can take.
Okay, great. Sorry, I just had a barking dog in the background. So we've heard about the ear seeds. We've heard about, pressing in the third eye. What are other types of, so we think about traditional acupuncture. When do you, and that's with those small little needles, what age do you sort of bring that into it?
Yeah, I think that it really depends on the child, but I start needling children, as young as, say, 4 to 6 months, with
Wow.
very gentle
Yes.
pediatric needles. And it is a technique that is very different than adult acupuncture. So in adult acupuncture session, you would put in the needles, and the adult would rest for, somewhere between 20 to 35 minutes.
Yes.
And then the needles would be taken out. Now, for children, obviously that is not going to work. And fortunately, their bodies have so much energy because they're growing and developing, that it is just a tiny amount of stimulation required to get the desired result. So with those tiny little pediatric needles, we just tap it in and take it out immediately.
Okay.
And babies don't even notice I'm doing it.
Yes.
So we have them distracted. Mama's reading to them or playing with them. They feel a little tube, a little tap, and it's over.
Yep. Okay. And what about sort of the more older sort of, when we get to the 4-year-olds, the 6-year-olds, the 8-year-olds, that
Right.
might be like, oh my gosh, needles, how does that work?
Right. It's something that you would not think would go together. But I
Mm-hmm.
have to say that the good news is really pediatric acupuncture. We have so many ways to stimulate the points. So we might apply pressure, we might apply a laser to the point, a phototherapy patch. We could use the ear seeds. So we have a lot of options. So if you're seeing a pediatric acupuncturist, they should have lots of different options so that no child ever left my office crying or screaming
Mm.
or anything like that, because there's really a bunch of different ways we can work with them. Having said that, when I did have my acupuncture practice, that was my favorite modality because it was so fast acting. And
Mm-hmm.
children, like for instance, I treated a lot of children with asthma and allergies, and they would feel immediate benefits as soon as they had the needles in. So for certain conditions, you absolutely, like, the needles would be the preference because they're going to
Mm-hmm.
get the best results the fastest. But for other conditions, the other points or ways to stimulate the points were also very effective, but maybe just were a little bit slower than the needles. So we might need a few extra treatments. But it's all about enjoying the journey and having a successful treatment. And all the children really do respond well to the different ways. And as they get older, they might retain the needles for, say, a minute, and
Yes.
then a few minutes, and then by the time they're about age 12, they might retain the needles for 10 to 20 minutes depending on their temperament and if they can sit still for that long.
Fantastic. So you talked about the patches. Can we sort of dive a little bit into that, and how they work?
Great question. So I use LifeWave phototherapy patches, and what
Mhm.
they do is your body emits infrared light. Like if we were to look on night vision goggles, right, you would see the light emitted by the body. And
Wow.
the patches basically reflect very specific wavelengths of that light back into the body. And then we just apply it to a specific acupuncture point, depending on what we're trying to do. So for instance, when I'm working with children that have issues with hyperactivity or they're very overstimulated, we'll often take this one particular patch called the Eon patch and place it behind the right ear. And parents report that they notice a calming response in their child in about 20 minutes. I think a lot of times it happens quite faster than that. But the patches have been shown in the research to actually stimulate that relaxation response within 20 to 30 minutes of application.
Oh,
And
fantastic.
it's another set it and forget it. You put it on for 12 hours, then you take it off. So
Definitely.
super
Yeah, no,
easy.
that does sound, really quite easy to do for families. Um, so with acupuncture, acupressure, is it sort of like a treatment plan for a period of time and then you stop, or do you need to keep up the modality? Or, how do families, say, let's say with kids with ADHD or mental health, conditions, and I know that every child is different, but,
Yeah.
what would that look like for someone?
Right. That's a great question. And the way that we evaluate it is really down to the severity of the symptoms.
Mhm.
So if a child is coming in with really severe symptoms and they're having trouble at home and school and behaviorally, we might initially recommend that they come in 2 to 3 times in the first couple of weeks to calm
Mhm.
things down. Then once they're stable, we typically recommend that they come in once a week for a period of time, and then we start to stretch those visits out until hopefully they're just on a maintenance type of plan where they come in once a month or once a quarter as needed. And I think that acupuncture works really well in conjunction with addressing those root causes. So, you're
Mhm.
looking at the diet, you're eliminating, levels of toxicity, you're addressing EMFs and other things so that we're eliminating all those layers of interference that are causing the nervous system to be out of balance in the first place.
100% agree with you there. It's how can we reduce that inflammation in the body? And it's not just the one thing. It's getting all those little pieces of the pie to all those ingredients to help that child to reduce that inflammation.
Exactly.
Yeah, for sure. When parents are looking for an acupuncturist, what should they look for?
They want to look for someone who's a trained pediatric specialist. So,
Mm-hmm.
someone who has specific training on how to work with kids. You want to look for someone who has multiple modalities to stimulate the points. So, if they are telling you, I only use needles, that might not be a good fit for your child.
Mm-hmm.
You want someone who maybe can do Tui Na massage or Shoni Shen, who has other modern tools like laser or microcurrent, so that we know that no matter what your child is receptive to, they'll have a tool that will work for your child.
That's fantastic. And is there a sort of a specialist board certification that they should look for, or is everyone certified under the same board?
Well, it depends on where in the world
Mm-hmm.
you live. If you're in the United States, then most of us we're either licensed nationally through
Mm-hmm.
the NCCAOM
Mm-hmm.
or licensed by state. So some states require the national license and some states license the acupuncturist individually. As far as pediatrics, though, there isn't any board certification. So you're just looking for someone who has additional training.
Training. Fantastic. And so, you've obviously trained in Chinese medicine as well. And can you talk about some things that relate to that and relate to what families can do to help, reduce that inflammation, reduce those symptoms outside of acupuncture?
Right. Well, I think that, like I said, diet is really
Yes.
important. I know you talk a lot about diet, Donna, and it's really key, right? We have to get rid of the inflammatory foods. We just want to stop irritating the gut, which in
Mm-hmm.
turn irritates the brain. And it's really a matter of finding your child's power foods, the foods that really work best for them. And once those foods are eliminated, then of course we need to be addressing the gut and the brain, and healing the gut so we can heal the brain.
Mm-hmm.
And just making sure that I think the other big piece is looking at their EMF exposure. So thinking about, where is your Wi-Fi router in your house? Is
Mm.
it on the wall opposite where your child is sleeping? So I had a client who actually had the Wi-Fi router underneath her son's bed,
Wow.
and he didn't want to settle. He kept popping
Mm.
up, and then he popped down, and then he was waking up tired, with dark circles under his
Yes.
eyes. And one of the biggest and most dramatic changes was moving that Wi-Fi router, out of the room, turning it off at night. And it was amazing, the shift in his sleep, and then in turn his behavior.
Oh, fantastic. That's wonderful to hear. Well, I'll definitely have to, as I said, I'll have to come have you come back and talk more on EMFs, because I think that is like a whole other podcast episode. So from your point of view, what is the best time to start the process of healing?
Oh gosh, as soon as possible. I
Mhm.
really believe that there are windows of opportunity in which it's the easiest to help our kids, and the earlier we start, the better. The more that they get more independent and they're away from you at school, the more difficult it is to monitor their diet and to make sure that they're getting the foods that are working best for their bodies. And before puberty is, I think, a really important window where we can
Yeah.
have a dramatic transformation in their health and behavior and really change the trajectory of their entire life for the better.
Yeah.
And we want to make sure that they at a certain point begin to understand that they're maybe not like the other kids, and maybe begin to feel bad about themselves, like, I'm just a bad kid. Or they might start to develop opinions about themselves that really, like we've talked about, that's not who they are.
Mhm.
It's the manifestation of what they've been exposed to. And so the earlier we can address it, it's going to help with their self-confidence, their self-esteem, and how they view themselves now and in the future. So it's a really important window, but I believe it's never too late. So even if you have teens that are struggling, there's still so much we can do to help them. And it truly is fixable when you have the right tools and you go after those root causes.
Yeah, I completely agree with you 100%. I have to say, I agree that, the sooner the better, and the easier it can be when you start earlier. With my son, we started at the age of 5, and, he's a teen now. He's in middle school, and, he hasn't been on those meds for years, but he's so much more bought into it because that's what he remembers. That's how he's grown up, in eating this way and knowing how food impacts his body. But at the same time, when you know better, you do better. And so if you are just finding out this information now, then you know this information now. So you can now help your child, even if they are a teen, or even if they're 18 and going off to college, and empowering them to live the most amazing life that they can live.
Yeah. And I think too, like with our teens, we have to kind of let them experience the ups and
Yes.
downs, right? Like if we've done anything to teach them to recognize their body's own signals, even if they go off the rails for a little bit, they will come back, because
Yes.
they're not going to feel good. They're going to come back and what did you like? Maybe I should stop eating all that gluten and pizza.
Yes.
Maybe that's not such a good idea for me. And then it becomes an empowered choice and they start making their own decisions for their health. But sometimes we have to let them kind of, fail a little bit
Yes.
before they get back on board and realize it was really important for them to eat a certain way or avoid certain things.
Yeah, no, completely agree. I can tell you. So, we're in our house, we're 100% gluten free every now and again, gluten and dairy and soy free. But every now and again, I will go out with my husband and have something with gluten, very rarely. But when I do, I feel terrible. And so, having those learning opportunities, I'm an adult, but I'm less likely to then now go, oh, I just remember that last weekend when I tried, it's not worth it to me anymore. And so letting that your teenagers experience that is really beneficial. And that's the view that I have with my son. I know he's going to go and eat stuff that we don't normally eat, and he will feel it, and he knows it because we've had those conversations of how food affects your body, how these other things affect your body and then affect your brain.
Absolutely. That's so smart. And it's something that it's so hard as a parent to let go sometimes,
Mhm.
especially I think when you work in the health industry or you're very committed to your own
Yes.
health and the health of your child, but also, it's also part of the learning process for them. So, so important.
Yeah, definitely. So, Robin, do you have any parting words of advice for parents out there just starting on their healing journey for their kids?
I would say that bringing in acupressure or ear seeds can be a lovely addition that is very affordable, very cost effective, and works wonders. And most kids really have no problem with it. And it might be able to just take a little bit of that pressure off and help your child during those critical moments when they need some extra support.
Fantastic. Well, thank you, Robin. We'll definitely drop some links below for families that can check out where they get those ear seeds or patches. But I really appreciate you coming on here today, sharing your knowledge and experience with all of our listeners. Please tell listeners where they can find you and follow you online.
Great. Thank you so much. Yes, you can follow me over at robinraygreen.com or on Instagram at Pediatric Healing Arts.
Fantastic. Thank you once again for joining me. Listeners, thank you for tuning in to this week's episode of The Soaring Child. I'm Dana Kay, your ADHD health practitioner. Keep on thriving. Thank you for listening to the Soaring Child podcast today. To learn more about how to help your child with ADHD soar using natural strategies, visit our website at adhdthriveinstitute.com and follow us on social media at ADHD Thrive Institute.